Welcome to my session, Web Access Management Modernization, and moving on from from your legacy WAM on forward, and how we can use automation and self-service to help bring you forward. Okay, so just a quick introduction about myself. My name is Kevin Shanley. I've actually been in the industry for quite some years. I got into IAM back in kind of the mid to late 1990s. And yeah, so over the course of my career, I've managed to get myself out there in a lot of different WAM sites. And that was really the primary part of my career was doing a lot of web access management across 30 different countries, hundreds of millions of users. And so, yeah, it's been kind of an interesting run doing this from the beginning. And now I've had the honor of actually going through and trying to automate this stuff, actually make it better and bring it all forward into the modern age. Okay, so let's just talk about the case for migration. And this is really kind of an industry trend that we've seen take hold. So back in, well, 1996, 1997, there was this guy at Netscape, and he wanted to enable a shopping cart application. And to do this, we needed this concept of a session context. And he invented this thing called the cookie. Now, this cookie was now really the invention, it became the cornerstone invention of what made web access management possible. And really, all web access management systems today are based on cookies. It's kind of that cornerstone security model, but it was never meant to do this stuff. And it's funny, like, the cookie was invented, and within like the same year, modern WAM, or I should say that legacy WAM that we're all aware of, it started happening. It exploded. Then within just a few years, we just saw the industry uptake go through the roof. And really by 2005, basically every major organization, government, they had web access managers in place. Fantastic adoption across that period. But it was also, this thing came out of a different time where we had kind of two browsers. You didn't really have mobile phones happening. Initially, IE didn't even have cookie support, which is crazy. A lot of your digital assets were actually doing things like, you would call up to get your bank account information. And so it was just a really different time in the world. And as we move forward, things have really changed. This thing came along called the cloud. We used to talk about this stuff on a rainy day, but yeah, the cloud has happened. We have this whole thing around the API economy. Mobile has pushed that, the internet in your pocket. And as this stuff has been pushing forward, WAM never really changed. It had that core architecture. It worked well enough. And so, with it working well, why change it? And it really comes down to these new requirements that have emerged over time, where cloud deployments and really the whole API economy, this destroyed our concept of a perimeter-based security model. And cookie-based security is based on a perimeter-based security model. You really need that stuff in place. I mean, how does a cookie work? Well, when you visit a website, it gets sent to your browser, and your browser just sends it back stupidly every single time you hit that website. And when it hits the web server, it'll convert that cookie into some HTTP headers. There's no digital signing. There's no interesting security around that. So you need perimeter security to make this whole thing work. And as we started going through and kind of reanalyzing how security works in the web access management space and how we actually operate in this model, we started looking at other things, like SSO questionnaires. Now, if anyone's ever dealt with a web access management team, you probably see that like when app owners come and they need to onboard a new app into their ecosystem, well, the SSO team will hand them a questionnaire. Hey, what's your app? How many servers do you need? But then they'll ask really low-level, crazy questions that app owners just have no concept of being able to answer. Things like, hey, how many SiteMinder realms do you need? Well, the SiteMinder realm, how could you ever expect them to answer these questions? And some of these questionnaires, they'd be 9 pages, 14 pages long. Insane, and they just caused a lot of friction and pain across the industry. Also, as we hit all this, we ran into these things called like zombie policies and orphaned objects, where 10, 20 years later, you go to start up your web access manager, you go to start up SiteMinder or Oracle, and then it goes and takes like 20, 30, 40 minutes just to start the server because it's loading all these junk policies that have accumulated over the years. You know, someone created it back in 2003, never used it again, and it's still there. Or they created a policy, deleted it, and all those orphan objects, parts of that policy are still out there clouding things up. And so then also the scale of things are changing, where, you know, we used to have, I would ask customers, hey, how many applications do you have? Oh, about 150. Now it's how many APIs? And it's in the thousands. And it changes the scale and the model of all this. And it's forcing the need to automate around this. And so we also want to get rid of kind of this central command control model. IAM folks are really expensive. They're very tough to find. You know, we want to be able to distribute the work effort around all this stuff. Oh, let me hit the bottom one. So, you know, one of the last ones here, there were no real standards in web access management. And by that I mean, you know, the only standard that really existed was that there were cookies, which is not a security standard. It's not any kind of a thing. It's just a mechanism for transporting your token. Everyone's got a different proprietary token. There is no interoperability, which meant you had deep vendor lock-in. And so 20 years on, you probably have your same WAM vendor you started with. And it was really difficult to move off of it. And so they kind of locked you in an expensive upgrade and maintenance cycle. So, you know, we have some issues. We want to move forward, but how? And so when we look at this stuff, you know, what's actually involved in a WAM migration? The first thing customers always bring to me is they talk about policy migration. They're like, yeah, we have all these SiteMinder policies or all these, you know, whatever Tivoli Access Manager policies. We want to push them forward into our new Web Access Manager. Well, that's great. That's not all there is, though. And I'm not going to go into depth about a lot of these different things, but the subject goes wide and deep on a lot of different parts. You know, just even simply, do you have a corporate site? Do you have a consumer site? These have vastly different impacts on how you do your migration. You know, you can push your employees to do a lot of things you can never push a customer to do. You change a customer's, you know, the way they use a site, it'll cause all sorts of thrash, it'll cause customers to leave, all sorts of problems. Something like password services. This is an interesting legacy one where, you know, back in the old days, well, I guess my old days, but you know, back in the 90s, really web access management, it predates a lot of identity management. Password services is an identity management problem, but it became a web access management problem because WAM came first. And where do you change your password? You know, it's where you sign on. It's a password reset. And now that we have web access managers that are doing single sign-on, well, they just inherited password services. Now it's your problem as a part of web access management as well. So this stuff all starts to boil in together. But then a lot of customers like to boil in other types of things. So we don't just want to do, you know, a migrate to a new WAM. We want to maybe migrate to the cloud. Maybe we still have Windows 2003 servers out there we want to also migrate. So there's now an infrastructure upgrade that's getting coupled together with all this stuff. All sorts of proprietary technologies baked into this. And then getting to the end of the unknown, the famous unknown unknowns. As I've gone through a lot of these migrations, there are things that we've run into that are just kind of unbelievable. We would find entire policy servers that even the SSO team didn't know about, that were running in the background for years and no one had turned them off. We'd look at them and see, wow, people are still using these things. And so, you know, you may think you have an app inventory, you may think you know what's being used, but you know, it's really not until you start moving the furniture around your house that you see, whoa, there's a hole in the wall, there's all this other stuff, which actually becomes a pretty important part of making a WAM migration. And so this is actually a diagram I put together back in 2013 or so. And we were trying to move to ping access and ping federate. And I was putting together how policies should be structured, what it takes to make a policy, and you know, for all the other web access administrators to be able to make this stuff work and do it in a predefined manner. Now you can look at this and see, hey, there's a lot of steps there. Each one of those steps can take a lot of time as well. So first I need to log into ping federate. I need to create a OAuth policy, an OAuth client. Just creating that OAuth policy, that could take you an hour right there, depending on how experienced you are, how good you are, and how complex that policy needs to be. And that alone is a lot of work. Then you go to the next thing, creating the client. Then you need to log into a completely different admin, start creating the application, the web session. Oh, when you create the web session, you need to share a shared secret between that and the OAuth client, and you need to make sure you don't share it with anyone else, because if that shared secret gets out, your whole application is compromised. So a lot of discombobulated steps put together that really made for a painful process. And I'd actually created a whole nomenclature way of doing this stuff, handed it over to the SSO admins, and within a few days, I saw there was havoc in the policy store. Like, even though I'd created all predefined rules, how this stuff would work, people went a little crazy, and it was just too much manual work. So let's see what that actually means. So we'll do a quick demo of manually creating a ping access policy. And we shrunk it down to a little 60-second process. OK, so here we go into the ping federate admin, and we're going to create that policy. So you see we've actually already pre-typed some of the things so we can go through a little bit faster. We're also going to speed up the video 400, 800%. Oh, after you create that policy, Ping wants to give you a whole bunch of default scopes that you need to go through and delete, and before you want to set up your policy. So we're just going to make a really simple one, no LDAP lookups or anything. Go through and all kinds of manual entry, lots of different points where you have to type in data. Oh, there's that client secret where that needs to come forward. We need to set up a redirection URIs correctly. If that doesn't go incorrect, the whole policy won't work. There are all kinds of areas where, with secure parts of this policy, we're now inside of ping access, and you can see it's a marathon to create this thing. There are a lot of steps and hoops you need to jump through to actually make this thing work. So here we are creating the web session, all sorts of different things here. We're actually going to investigate a bit further to see what things can go wrong around all this. You need to create that agent that you're going to be deploying. And we have everything enabled. Oh, need to create a new identity mapping for this. So these are simple HTTP headers. We didn't have any LDAP lookups, so I just be like a username here. Go, save it, and done. Or are we? See that yellow bar up there? We actually did it wrong. So somewhere in there, we had a typo that actually broke this policy. And of course we did, because there's so many places where you can actually make a mistake here. This was the core problem. We would go through and do this stuff. You'd run into errors. Sometimes you spend hours trying to fix these things. And these were people who knew what they were doing. This became kind of the genesis point of like, how do we make this easier? How do we make it faster? So there was actually a funny story of when I was a kid, my parents got me this video. They wanted my grades to go up. And I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember this, but there was this infomercial that would be on where this Professor Claude Olney would have this videotape of teach you where there's a will, there's an A. And so they got me this videotape. And he had a really interesting story in there of, he's like, okay, imagine you're in your house with your best friend, sitting on the couch watching TV, and your dog has to go to the bathroom. So the dog walks up to the front door and starts scratching at the screen door, going around in circles, yelping and stuff. Your friend turns to you and says, hey, what's up with your dog, man? He's going nuts. You got to take care of that. Now imagine the same scenario, but your dog has to go to the bathroom, walks up to the door, gets up on his hind legs, hits the latch, and goes right on out. Your friend would probably turn to you and say, dude, you got a pretty smart dog. And then he said 4 words that kind of resonated with me. Which dog worked harder? And it wasn't, he started to really decouple this concept of work producing results. There was a direct relationship of this, that you had to work hard to actually produce results. Let's find smarter ways of actually doing this stuff to make it all go forward. Video actually worked. My grades went up after that. Okay, so likewise, let's take that video and look at just what it takes to do a one-click create operation using our automation suite. So here we're going to do the very same thing. We're going to go into our automation suite. Here we've tried to standardize all the policies, get all the security templates down. We need an app name. We need a template. We need to really know what the virtual host is to create this thing, and then that's it. Which dog worked harder? And really it becomes a question, and there's a big difference between this policy and the last one. This one worked, which is a world of difference. And it becomes a big difference, especially when we're managing these things with limited IAM resources. It's so tough to find these people in the marketplace. We need to find ways to actually scale things up. Okay. So that brings us to, what we were doing with the KPMG Access Management Orchestration Suite, KAMOS. What we're doing with KAMOS is that became kind of the inception of a whole lot of tools, where we looked at how we were doing things for the past 20 years and said, how do we do it better? How do we do less work, get more done, make everything easier, make policies that are more transportable so that when I push them from dev to test to QA to prod, they're easily mutable and I can push them across with a single click of a button. How do I do this in such a way so that when someone calls up support with a problem, we can actually answer their problems faster because we can jump through some of these steps. So we went right around this web access management policy lifecycle, and everything starts off with that build process up in the upper right-hand corner. And using that build process, we created a couple different tools. We created a SiteMinder migration tool, an Oracle Access Manager migration, migration tools around these legacy WAM vendors, as well as a generic CSV migrator. We have a one-click creation tool. And then going right around, we created a whole offline test tool. Next part of the friction was the SSO team would often hand off a policy to an app owner. App owner goes off, installs it, says, hey, it doesn't work. They end up going back and forth, trying to figure things out. So we created a tool that would actually enable you to test the policy logic before you even hand it off or install things on the network. Wanted to enable users, so we created an entire self-service suite to be able to go in and manage these policies from the app owner perspective. And that is an entire journey on its own. One of our most popular tools as well, policy promotion. Being able to take that policy and quickly move it from dev to test QA to prod. We actually had to iterate many times through that, where each time we would get a little bit closer, but our very first iteration was actually the most development. We created this giant complex UI that would transform all the policy data from dev and push it into test. And we took it to the first customer, and they said, this is never going to work. Like, the guy who pushes policies, he doesn't know how ping works. And when he goes to do this stuff, it's at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday night. He's working with half a brain. You need to give him a button. He pushes the button, and it pushes the policy into production. That's what it's got to be. And so then we went back to the drawing board and really rethought everywhere that there was a button or something, how do we do it better? How do we make this work better with our operations schemes? And then likewise, doing one-click policy removal and a whole policy version control database. We started off doing everything with just ping identity, ping access, ping federate, but we've also expanded this out to integrating with Azure and Okta tenants. And finally, there's actually a policy toolbox that it enables a whole bunch of bulk tools as well. So when we go and we want to do this migration, we have what we call the red pill, blue pill. Do you want to actually migrate with some of our automated migration tools, or do you just start fresh? And this is really one of the first questions that goes out to customers, where we need to say, hey, if you want to use a migration tool, great. We have tools for a lot of those things. It can be a great way to pull things forward, but it's not without some of its downfalls. A great thing, you get to actually see what policies are that you're moving forward and inspect them in a little more nicely formatted manner. Bad thing, the person who made that policy probably isn't here anymore. You don't know why they made the policy that way. The policy was made to fit that web access manager. They created it so it was going to reuse the SiteMinder caches a little bit better, or it was made to fit within Oracle Access Manager a little bit better. And so when you try and pull that forward, it may not be the greatest policy inside of a ping access or an Okta. And so this is really, it's part of the problem of migration. We're going from one system to something really, really different. So the other way is one-click create, where we say, you know what? We're going to leave the past in the past, and we're just going to take things forward and start fresh. And so we created a whole methodology of doing this one-click creation tools and be able to do this where start fresh with a brand new policy that works great, follows our company standards, and then we can use complete self-service workflows to enable app owners to go in and customize their own policies. Okay, so let's have actually a quick look at what it takes to create a policy with a migration of CA SSO or CA SiteMinder. So we have here just the home page of the KAMOS suite, and we want to go forward and do a CA migration. So all we need to do is actually take an XPS export out of SiteMinder. It's one of their standard XML exports, and pull this into the system. Oops. So this is actually a small policy file. It has only 4 policies. It's about 10,000 lines of XML, which is kind of crazy. We have pulled in files here that are up to 1 million lines of XML. There's actually a whole background transformation process that occurs to make the whole process run really fast. And essentially, it'll take us through a little wizard of we'll select our SiteMinder domain, import the policy, and get our results. So let's pull in this demo policy, or this demo application. And so we'll see here, it's not really a one-click process, right? We need to actually be able to see what's going on with the lights. So we need to be able to see what's going on with the policy before we bring it forward. We purposely disabled things like you can't bulk create or bulk migrate policies. It's too hard. Like there are too many variables in the equation. There are things that are different in SiteMinder from Ping, and you just can't make that easy one-to-one analysis. And the first thing that comes up is authentication requirements. In the Ping world, authentication is a completely different animal from how it was done in the SiteMinder world. It's something we couldn't just do automatically, so we do ask you to do it manually. But we can then override authentications on different resources, and all of our fields are typable so that we can actually do other types of migrations, migrate directories as well. As we come to the bottom, so it'll actually bring our resources, it'll bring parts of the agent configuration object of SiteMinder across, all parts of the policy, and then as we move this forward, we still have a couple more things we need to put in. What host are you going to use to import this policy to? And this is something, it just doesn't even exist in a SiteMinder policy. They do things differently. And so it's something that we actually need to add here, and I'll just grab my cheat sheet. Oops. And put that in. And the other thing here is if we want to migrate from a SiteMinder agent to a proxy, it's not going to know what the proxy we want to go to either. If I were to actually switch this to an agent, we would be able to go in directly. It would all have that pre-filled. But we're actually going to do a site-based migration. And I'll pull that data in from here. Okay, and it's going to pull in our headers, our custom rules, and I actually have the resource sitting up here. It's currently not deployed with anything, so it's getting forbidden pages. And we're going to create that application. It's going to auto-generate that Ping Federate OAuth policy, the OAuth client, all parts of the proxy site, the web session, the rules, and you can see it's created a whole bunch of rules just to make some of those things happen as a part of all this. And so here we have what should be a fully working policy, all those different objects coming in. Oh, and it already refreshed where we have we can actually log in and access the policy. So from there we're able to. Oops, let me. We're able to then go in and actually access this application now. It's now a live running app with the policy migration. And it's a fantastic way to bring things forward. It's not perfect, though, because of all those other things mentioned. And likewise, if we were to flip it up and do, what is our other way of migration? Well, that would be with a one-click create process. So let me just show a quick demo of that one. We'll go to our policy automation, where we can do one-click create. And beyond just doing a policy migration, some cool things we could do with this is actually coming in and, what if we were to rethink operations? What if we were to not give people an SSO questionnaire, but to give them a self-registration page instead? And we just ask them for a couple bits of information, where we just need to know, hey, what's your app name? how's your app deployed? What servers are is it deployed on? And who's the application owner? And from this stuff, we can really quickly go out and create a brand new application that's fully functional. So this is going to be a proxy-based app. We're going to select a template with this thing. And I will give it a context. A virtual host. Oops. And we're going to give it a site target. And then we're actually going to enable a full self-service workflow with all this stuff. So that I'll assign it to my user.5 user. Oops. There we go. And we'll go ahead and create that application. So this is then going to go off and, well, it's already created. We can run a fully headless system where you create the stuff from scratch using something like a self-registration screen. And where we had that app, we now have a working banking app where you can actually log in, and I'll just log in with that user, be able to access this banking application, do different things. But maybe this application doesn't actually do everything I need it to do, which brings us to self-service. Maybe I want to do more protection around things like make a payment. So let me go back to self-service here. And it kind of comes up with the problem of automation. I can do that one-click create 20 more times, and guess what? We're going to have 20 pretty identical policies. It's great. It gets you 80% of the way there, but there's still that last mile of integration, which is kind of painful. And even if you could automate the entire journey, you're still going to have a problem because applications change. You find bugs in applications. You're going to have to go back and actually be able to modify that policy at different times. How do we actually automatically fix these things? And it comes back to something that people used to ask about from the early 2000s. We need delegated automation, to which I used to always tell customers, you don't want delegated administration like you think you do, but actually all you're doing is just opening up complex administrative user interfaces to end users who have no capability of understanding what's in there. So you're not actually enabling users, you're just giving them access to stuff they don't understand. And one of the simplest objects in paying access is a web session. It's got kind of 8 basic attributes. Well, 6 of those attributes, if you give people access to change, they're going to break things. If they change the OpenID Connect login type from a code to a post, well, not only will they probably break it, but it'll also cause a security issue because now their ID token is going to be in the clear. If they change their client ID, they're going to break it. If they change their client secret, they're going to break it. If they change the name, they're going to cause a maintenance issue. I'll come back to that. If they change their cookie type from encrypted to signed, they're going to create a security issue because now their stuff is going around in the clear. If they change their audience, they're going to break it. So with so many different things, you're causing issues. And all we really wanted was that thing at the bottom. What do users want to change? Like an idle timeout and a max timeout. Really just the minimal basic stuff around all this. And getting back to what is that maintenance issue? Well, when we create policies, we want to create them in a way that makes them also easy to troubleshoot. Single biggest thing that goes wrong in OpenID Connect applications is that the clients become, the clients don't have a whitelist of URLs. And when they don't have the correct whitelist, your whole OpenID Connect sequence fails. It happens all the time. And what typically happens around that, so the policy fails, users call up and say, hey, I can't log in, I can't hit the application. And so the SSO support person will say, hey, what's the name of your application? And so then they log into Ping Access, and they find the name, and then they find the web session. And from the web session, they can find the client. From the client, they'll then have to go to Ping Federate, go to that client, figure out what the redirect URLs are. A lot of steps in there. But what if the web session has the same name as the application? And then instead of going through all those hoops, you say, hey, what's the name of your application? And when they tell you, you say, well, I already know what the web session is. I'll skip to step 5. I can look at the web session, and now I can fix the OpenID Connect piece. And your operations go a lot faster. So self-service. When we went and I actually tried to build out self-service and figure out what it would require, we really had to start reinventing the wheel on ourselves. You get so deep into the weeds on a lot of these types of things that doing self-service, it becomes problematic. Hey, I know lots of things about ping access, but an application owner does not. And when I say an application owner, this will be someone who is what I call a casual user of a self-service or of a web access manager. So a casual user, they have very limited knowledge. They might know things like an idle timeout or a max timeout, but they're not going to know the intrinsics of like a web access management system. It's got to be super easy. You need to focus in on that 80% use case. And essentially, an important thing to recognize early on, it's not going to do everything. You're always going to be in the case of you need to be able to decide what things you're going to open up to users and what things you're just going to leave to always, it'll always be a support call. And that's actually an important decision to make. And I liken it to if you had a home building company and let's say you want to automate your workers and we're going to go from using hammers to using nail guns. Well, now we can build a house in a fraction of the time. But then if you go back in the house and you see you've already packed up the trucks and you see there's still a loose board, do you actually go out to the truck, get the compressor, plug it in, get your nail gun, screw that all stuff in, and then one nail? No. You pull out a hammer and you just knock it in. Which dog worked harder? So it's not a failure if you don't automate or provide self-service for everything. It's always a factor of just trying to get to that easiest path forward. Likewise, when you go self-service, fault tolerance takes on a whole life of its own. It becomes an entirely new thing. And the biggest thing there are cascading policy failures. You'll have applications where people share an object. Maybe they share a web session. You have 3 different apps sharing the same web session. If you allow the HR app to go and change that thing, he'll break the other 2 apps. So now users are enabled to break each other's apps, not even just their own. So you need to build in enormous security controls around that to prevent this type of behavior, and also be able to provide a recovery path. And finally, it really needs to be super configurable. Certainly from a product standpoint, customers have different ideas of how to do these things, but even your own user populations will have different ideas of this stuff. You'll essentially have this a population that you start socializing into the situation, and you can start opening up things as you go along. As you see what works or what doesn't work, you can actually change things. And as a result, we also built in full customizability around read, write, visibility controls. One size doesn't always fit all. And I think this one goes to illustrate this more than just about anything on the slide deck. I say consider a medium complexity rule. And probably most, if not everyone in this room, has seen or used a rule like this in the past. And it's, if I'm coming in from the local network, if I'm coming in from the local network, I just need to log in with username and password. But if I'm coming in from an external network, we want to do a strong authentication. Well, this is, if we want to create a rule like this in the ping access world, guess what? You need to create 3 rules. Then you need to create 2 rule sets. You need to assign those 3 rules into those 2 different rule sets. Then you need to create a rule set group to do the and/or logic correctly. So we need to create these 6 different objects just to make a simple rule. Who here knows what the difference between a rule set and a rule set group is? We have one. And it's, you cannot expose casual users to any of this complexity. And even the complexity of what's in pink is actually hard for a lot of folks. And so we need to make things, how do we make it super simple? And so there are going to be a lot of use cases and rules where, yeah, it'll still end up becoming some sort of a call back to the SSO team, but we can still get pretty far without that. So we had kind of a novel way of taking this forward. And we said, hey, what if we were to just find kind of that 80% use case of rules that people use a lot? We'll create that rule for you and make it available. We'll provide contextual help so that you'll be able to, so that end users will be able to know what that rule actually does, and it's not just some rule name of local IP or something. And so we have a whole set of shared rules, but then if you do need to make your own rules, we created another thing called rule templates, where we have a whole set of templates of just a couple of the different types of rules you'd probably like to create and we hide everything else. Maybe you don't want your users to start making OAuth rules or writing Groovy script or write in line or to be able to have WebSocket rules. Maybe we just want them to have simple group rules, a couple of simple things, maybe a rule about step-up authentication. And then we created this new concept of application scoped rules, so that there are rules that my app I can customize and use and no one else will see. Okay, so let's take forward that self-service workflow and see what happens. So when I went and one-click created this application here, we assigned this to our user.5. And if he checked his email, he'd see that he was now the owner of this application, and he can actually then go and log into self-service. Okay, let's log in as this user. All right, and this brings up our self-service console, where the user is able to see all their different applications, what they have available, and actually manage policies around that. So this was this demo bank application I created, and he can manage his policy. He can take backups of his own policy, see maybe how his policy is differentiated from previous versions, and even promote it. So he can actually take that policy and then push it into like the test environment. And so really quickly, this user is able to do a lot of different things to move their policy forward. Likewise, if he just wants to go in and manage things, perhaps he wants to manage a web session, or in this case, let's go ahead and create a protected resource. So we'll do a high-risk transfer resource. Okay. And create that. Now we actually have this resource. Some things you might want to do. Well, maybe you actually want to be able to test it. And so we integrated a full testing console into this so that the user will be able to then go and test this thing and see how the policy functions. Not even just as myself, but I can put all sorts of different users in here and test and see how their policy would execute, what headers are provided for this policy, and if their logic would actually work. And this is where we get to rules, because maybe I want to start adding more things to this policy. For example, well, maybe I want to do a step-up authentication. Well, what does this rule do? Use this rule to enforce step-up authentication to a resource, and users will be prompted for ping ID. So let me go ahead and add that one in there. And then if we were to go try and make a transfer, should be prompted if my internet's working correctly. Yeah. Okay. And it's coming up. All right. And we're in. And so we're now able to delegate out the whole concept of people managing their own applications in a way that's palatable, that's capable for these users to take things forward. So likewise, we can go back here, and perhaps the user wanted to add other types of rules. So we can do things, not just even with the available shared rules, but create a new rule from a template. So it's a completely foreign concept to what's really in any other out-of-the-box web access management system. But wouldn't it be nice if I could give an application owner a little contextual help? Hey, you want to create a simple rule for a group or an email address? Maybe you want to create a rule for a complex group, a whole, this group or this group or this group, giving them all the pointers to be able to go and make this thing and add it to their app, and then they can customize it all on their own, all without any ability of them to, break other things. Okay. So that is a self-service console in a nutshell. And the final thing I wanted to talk about is bulk management overall, which is also a cornerstone to keeping your system nice and clean, which we found that as we've hit all these systems that are 10 years, 20 years old, they are packed with 20% dead policies, 50% dead policies, some even as many as twice as many policies not being used anymore, tons of orphaned objects, causes their policy servers to be incredibly slow. And so, we started to think, why? Why does this have to be this way? Or why did it get this way? Well, there's a key problem to this. Number one, none of these web access managers actually provide you a way to clean things up. And everyone's afraid to delete something because it might be used. And then you get that angry call, why the heck did you delete this? And so we created a whole set of bulk tools around sweeping up your policy, being able to do in a very soft way, disable policies, disable objects, and then only after some set period of time, like 60 days, are you allowed to then go and clean things up. If nobody complains in 60 days, it's probably not being used. And so we actually created it not just with bulk disable, like we have two different ways we put in there. How do you find if a policy is not being used? Well, there is no Splunk search. There's no way you can say, hey, give me a list of all the policies that don't exist. And so what we actually enable is you can do a Splunk search, find all the policies that are actually that are being used, upload that list to our system. We'll find the inverse of that, all the policies that are not on that active list, and you can set them up for being disabled and schedule them for deletion. Likewise, there's a policy sweeper function that actually goes through and will find every single object in your system that's not tied to other objects and give you the option to blow it all away. So let me just give you a really quick view of that one. We're going to go into our main KAMOS suite. So we have our new policy toolbox here. And there could be all kinds of things, maybe use cases of bulk export. I want to build an entirely new system, but I don't want to use all the same keys and things. I don't want to just copy my ping access system. Maybe I just want to export all the policies and then import them to that other system. This gives me that complete capability of doing an offline backup of these policies, saving it somewhere else, or standing up a sandbox somewhere else. Likewise, you do the create import. Meanwhile, that thing will just continue running in the background. And likewise, we have that whole disable remove process where you can do it forwards and backwards, policies to deactivate, or the currently active policies. And with Policy Sweeper, just being able to go through, scan for orphaned objects, find all the things you don't need. It means your policy server is faster, it means your admin UI is faster. Everything you do for support operations, for maintaining this thing, everyone works faster. Who worked harder? So with that, any questions? Okay.
So you showed us, applications being migrated from like the legacy WAMs to ping access, ping fed, or Azure, or whatever.
Yes.
What kind of changes are required on the application end? Because like my legacy applications will still be looking for cookies or headers, right? And then you are migrating them to POD 2.0 and OpenID. What changes are required on application end?
Okay, so the question there is when you do a legacy WAM migration, you pull an application forward, what other types of changes do you need to make to an application to actually make that full integration take effect? So there are a couple things that would generally need to happen. When you do the like-for-like migration, you're going to go from WAM HTTP headers to HTTP headers on the other side, but you will now have upgraded your ecosystem. The next step is you want to, I'll say, JOTify or upgrade your application so that it can use standard JOT signatures or standard signed JOT tokens. And that can be something you either pull from the standard, if you're using an open source product or if you're using ping access, where you can actually pull in and convert that like encrypted JOT into a signed JOT token internally to your network and use that to have a fully signed infrastructure. So you can really fully get away from that perimeter-based infrastructure.
Can this be used, so if I want to minimize my changes to the application, so can it keep on creating OBS as a cookie from OAM perspective or SiteMinder cookie, CE cookie from SiteMinder perspective? So that the application doesn't need to make changes, but I can decommission OAM.
Okay, so there's a question of, can you decommission or reuse like the legacy SSO cookies? Generally, no. you can actually, so ping access has a capability so that it does token mediation. It can actually generate site monitor tokens or OBS tokens on the fly. Problem is, once you decommission that legacy WAM provider, you're not getting those cookies anymore, and you need to have gotten those agents and things out of there. And generally, that is the way you would want to go forward with it. If you keep both WAM sessions in place, everything's slower, right? Every layer of WAM, it's going to add response time lag. Other questions?
Yes, in regard to the self-service portal, two questions.
Sorry?
So, in regard to your self-service portal,
Yes.
first question is, what was your adoption rate with your user audience? What was the adoption rate on that? Part two of that question is, what challenges did you see that the users had when adopting that new self-service that you were, the things you knew prior to actually developing the service?
Okay, two-part question. Part one, what was the adoption rate of self-service? And what were the problems that were encountered as a part of that? So adoption rate on self-service is, you have to start off easy, like with really minimal functions. The first time we started showing this out to users, we didn't realize how much sort of ping-specific terminology and things we'd put in there. Some people looked at that and said, wait, what's a rule set? And then as soon as someone said that, I slammed my head. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't see that before. And so, yeah, you do have to do a slow rollout. You have to have a little bit more of a training methodology or mechanism in place. What we'll typically say is to go forward, put a little video up on the homepage of the self-service portal. First time someone comes in, they can actually get 30 second to a minute and a half of, hey, you're now in this application. Here's a quick primer of how you go through and add some stuff, and here's a support number to help you out. And yeah, so the self-service portal is fairly new. We basically just released it. We've done some betas with customers, so I can't comment on the full adoption of it.
I have a question. So,
Yes.
so obviously this is a suite you built for your client-facing endeavors, right? I'm just curious, in your enterprise, is this dog food at all? Did your enterprise team ever use this to do any sort of migration, or is it still doing client-facing?
They have not. It's all client-facing for this. Okay. I think we're just about time. Last question, anyone? Oh, in the back.
Keep upgrading your ping access and ping fed, right?
Yep.
What are the level of changes for the portal?
Good question. So question was, you're constantly upgrading ping federate, ping access. How do you upgrade the KAMOS suite? How do you upgrade self-service? How do you fit into those situations? So that was a decision we made from the ground up early on. So with different ping access API versions, we actually have different Java data beans tied to those different versions, and we actually do bean transformations or data transformations. So you can actually upgrade your ping access and ping federate and dev, export policies out of that, and we will downgrade them as you push them to test and such, and be able to transform that down. It's not always 100%. If you use a brand new feature in ping access in one version and try and downgrade it, it may not work exactly the way you expect, but you're trying to use something that doesn't exist on a target system. And with ping federate, it's actually a murkier question, because even though the product's been around for over 15 years, that product, it has no concept of anything other than a V1 API. There's only one API. It's obviously changed over the years. And we actually have to do some internal tests to see, okay, what version is it coming from? How do some of these APIs work? And then the suite takes care of it seamlessly from the back end.
How do you manage the different environments through the single specialized? So having a stage and promoting it to all, how do you manage that?
So that's all done in our settings console. You just set up the different environments. We point to what you need to hit in those environments. I'll just show that console really quick, and then I think we have to quit. But essentially, let's see if the internet connection holds out long enough. So when we go and actually do settings and set up an environment, we'll set, hey, for a dev environment, here's where ping access is. Here's like what the API version is tied to it, and the associated ping federate. Likewise, if it's Okta, like an Okta plus ping access, here's where the Okta tenant is that we need to be able to access and push policies to. Okay, so with that, I'm running over my time. Thanks so much for attending. Be sure to come back.